Hello, my name is Daniel Freeman, integration coach. I'm joined here by Gay Lynn, a licensed mental health counselor and addiction specialist. And this is Ask an Integration Specialist number 3. We're glad to have you joining us. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. So, Galen, you are going to be hosting a ceremony that is based on the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, for those that don't know, the Eleusinian mysteries were rites that were held in the Temple of Eleusis in Greece, and they were based on the story of Demeter and Persephone. So this was a ritual that many famous philosophers such as Socrates took part in. It is it's a really fascinating insight into the ritual use of psychedelic substances in ancient history for religious purposes. So that's the little background information for the total newbies. And with that, I'd love to ask you, how are you recreating this? And um, especially what elements were you able to completely faithfully recreate and what had to be and what elements had to be filled in and how did you fill in those gaps?
Great question. And I'm so excited that you are going to be joining us in this weekend as well, Daniel. So they have the opportunity to actually have the experience with both of us. The Eleusinian mysteries really were about initiation. And as a community, they were initiated together. And there were facilitators, like we play those roles, that helped in this initiation. And part of what was so dynamic about this is that it was a community ritual. And community and like mindedness holds this resonance. It's almost like the energy of the group carries a container. And there were greater mysteries, lesser mysteries, and greater mysteries that they kind of processed through. So the first part of it was just fasting, which is a very good idea, no matter what kind of medicine you're using to do as a preparation. Then there was cleansing, and there were ritual baths that they used in order to cleanse themselves. They would go to the river, wash themselves in the river, and then there was this walking that they would do. Now, and they would walk together as a community before they got to the temple. And then once they got to the temple, there were certain sacrifices that were made. And then they went in and they had the experience. And it really is about a descent and a return. And this theme of descent and return is really the overarching theme with Demeter and Persephone. And Demeter and Persephone are really about cycles and patterns. And so they in that time kind of represented this spring, summer, fall, winter pattern. And so also in our lives, we have this same kind of pattern. We have the spring of our life, the summer of our life, and then also fall and winter. And in winter, nothing grows. Now, this can be a cycle that is a lifetime, or it can be a kind of cycle or pattern that's happening in the current moment, where perhaps a person's life is kind of laid fallow and nothing is really growing. And Persephone has is taken to by Hades into Hades. And so that's the descent. And so the descent is into ourselves. Hades takes her to perhaps what we might call the shadow side. And so the way we're going to walk through this is we will do our own fasting. We will do our own dream work prior to and setting intention. We will do our own kind of cleansing, and we will walk on this land, this wonderful land that we're going to be on was Seminole Indian land that was ceremonial space. And the land itself has such an energy to it, Daniel. I'm super excited. We're going to be at the Inner Transformation Center that's in Dunellen. And it has this wonderful energetic feel to it that you can sense right away. And so we will do some walking on that land, and it has some different energy spots on it that are really good for balancing masculine energy, for balancing feminine energy. It also has a little fountain that we could use to, do our cleansing, do our rituals at. and it has a really interesting geodesic dome, which is in the middle of the property, which we will also be utilizing as a part of the ritual. It'll be like our little tiny temple that we enter into. But also, we have the land and we have a larger room that we will do the greater mystery, which is utilizing the psychedelic medicine in order to go into that space of understanding ourselves, understanding our journey, understanding our life. They were doing it to find out more about their afterlife, which is interesting in and of itself. We will do it as an informed, trauma informed, with lots of care, with lots of the protocols in place in order to find out places perhaps where we need some healing in this life and get information about our whole life journey.
Hmm. Well, there's several details to touch on there. But one of the things that you brought up that is very near and dear to my heart is this aspect of community. So with any sort of ritual like this, this was something that was a glue that connected entire civilizations at times. And one thing that I always look at whenever we're doing ritual like this with community is how can those bonds, and this goes for any ceremony people might attend, how can those bonds be maintained and the connections maintained after and post ceremony, especially with people going back to sometimes to family that is, let's say, disconnected from these practices.
I think community is the key because in our culture today, particularly, we feel disconnected. And so the medicine at its very best helps us to connect, and the medicine done with an intentional community really helps us to connect and form those energetic bonds. It's like a resonance. Rupert Sheldrake talked about a morphic resonance. And so we create that morphic resonance together in the journey. And so then we step out of that and we need to do integration. That's why we're talking about this in a very mindful way, not only at the time of ceremony, but in the days and weeks following ceremony. So we will continue to talk with the people that are doing this journey with us. It's called the Descent and Return, Psychedelic Streams and Rituals Retreat. And we will continue to kind of help them with their integration. And by journaling, looking at their dreams, meeting with them periodically to touch in, it keeps the resonance of that field created alive. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Well, I've experienced it directly whenever I'm in a ceremonial space or even just with a gathering of people, an intentional gathering where there's any kind of shared purpose involved or plant medicines. I've noticed that synchronicities are stronger. I have more clarity. I have more energy. The entire feeling in my body and my mind is completely different. And it's it's consistent. It's consistent time and time and time again. That's been consistent, and it's something that I hope that everyone can experience. And one of the reasons that I do think that these kinds of rituals are really important, so that people can find each other, can and make those connections, start building community, and especially the follow up too. Like I really do think it's important to continue to maintain those bonds and connections long after the ceremony's done. So it's definitely not a one and done. Never is.
It never is. And that connection with community reminds us that we're not alone. Connection to community and ritual and sacred space created reminds us there is a power greater than ourselves that we are connected to. And then we can bring a little bit of that as above, so below. We can bring a little bit of that divine essence and bring it here to earth. And boy, does our earth need that now.
Yeah.
We really need that divine essence to be brought here, bring in the light onto the planet, and particularly this connection with the earth and with our earth mother and with Gaia, the sacredness of her being our true mother that has supported us and sustained us and given us everything, the honoring of our connection with Gaia, with Earth Mother, is a part of that divine essence in the way I see it. We come from the earth, we are of the earth, and we're not, and through that we're connected to her and to each other in a very special way. And ritual and ceremony, particularly when you add in this reverence for the Mother Earth and the medicines used in a mindful and conscious way, can enhance all of those connections at a very deep level.
Mm. I think they can also show us things that we can't normally see or perceive so well. And one of the big challenges with that concept that you've talked about being one with the earth is that if one isn't there yet, if somebody's not there yet and they don't see that, that's been a challenge of how can they be shown this? And for me, it's sometimes you need to experience something from a different perspective, or in order to empathize, you have to actually go through that. Um, so I do think that one of the really, really helpful things that plant medicines can do is they can give you a direct experience of some kind of what maybe what the a little bit of what the planet might be experiencing or what other people might be experiencing that you've heard, like really show you, have you walk in their shoes,
Mhm.
as opposed to just hearing it in words. But that's I I do think that it ultimately plant medicines can lead you to water in that way, but they can't make you drink. So it is still possible for somebody, unfortunately, I have to acknowledge it's possible for somebody to have that experience and still go back to the things they were doing before. But what do you think are some of the ways, and I have my own opinions on this too, but what do you think are some of the ways have the outcomes be to have the outcomes stick? Obviously, integration is one of the biggest pieces, but what do you think are some of the best ways to have the integration and the outcome really stick from an experience rather than them just having it and then going back to their old ways?
I think in the experience, and I really encourage people to do this while you're having a vivid dream experience, while you're having a very vibrant medicine experience, you need to make a very visceral memory of it. And that is why I think it's really important, because sometimes when we're in ceremony, and especially if we're using medicines, we don't always remember everything that happened. And so it's really important to have people there who can kind of capture a few things. And I know in the way that I like to do ceremony, I have a scribe or write down some of the things that happened. What did you see? How did you feel? What came up? You know, if they saw this beautiful tree and this vibrant river, and and then they saw some of their master teachers standing along this river. That's a very vivid image. It's an image that they would write about in the scriptures. I'm thinking, even as I say it, about the 23rd Psalm. um, Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You go to prepare a place for me. And so this beauty of the land, this beauty of nature, is a healing balm in and of itself, but making a very vivid memory of what that looks like. You walk with me beside the still waters. You comfort my soul. Those are beautiful words. And sometimes the visual comes up in the ceremony where they see themselves by the still waters. They see themselves walked by their teachers or their spiritual guides. And that is a very powerful experience. And they can come back to that visual, they can come back to that memory, and really make it visceral in their body.
I think it's excellent advice. The best analogy that I can make for somebody that's brand new to plant medicines or that's never sat with one before is definitely that of a dream. So, in the same way that the dreams can fade, even if it was very, very vivid, it can happen with plant medicine experiences as well. And so, your advice to really make some kind of like either an image or writing is really good. And I'll drop some solid gold for people here too. While you are in the experience, one of the most helpful things, at least for me, has been chunking. That is the act of taking a lot of information and breaking it down into a few smaller, broader categories. So, for instance, on my last medicine experience, there were three. That tends to be a theme with me. There were three broad categories, and one of them was getting rest, so making sure to take the time to rest. Another one was just being human, taking the time to just be human. And the other one was another piece of in a solid gold. I'll call that one. It is solid gold that I'll drop as well. So the other one was noticing a very particular thing about myself. So in this case, it was a hypervigilance about the needs of others. The medicine was showing me very clearly that I rarely, if ever, turn that off. And that was just destroying my energy, just constantly having this antenna pointed outwards, trying to see. So the solid gold there is the act of noticing. That is something that has made a huge difference in my integration process, and it's also so simple too. So the medicine will often show you things about yourself that kind of like you're from a bird's eye view, things that you won't necessarily notice in your day-to-day life, but they might show you like, oh, you have a pattern of reacting in anger to XYZ. You have a pattern of people pleasing. You have a pattern of shutting, etc. So all these depending on your particular thing, but the thing to do there is just whenever it comes up, just notice it from to start with. You don't have to try and fight it. Just notice to start, and eventually it does that already is a huge step towards healing. So those are my two things. Chunk the information, put it into a few simple broad categories. I usually like doing two to three. And notice, take note of what the medicine's showing you as your patterns, and just make sure you notice whenever you're falling into it. So that's mine. That's my
That's
pieces.
great. That's
Mm,
excellent. I have one to add to that as well.
mm,
One of the ways that we can get a insight into our dream realm and say we have a dream and it seems really kind of bizarre and all these different characters show up and you're not quite sure what it's about. One of the easiest ways to kind of get a little insight out of that is give the dream a title, like a book. Like if this was a book or this was a movie, what interesting title would you give this movie?
mm,
And it gives you that kind of like insight right away. Like this movie would be called, you know, um, seeing the world through others' eyes, something, or whose life is this? you know, and and so with the subtitle seeing life through others eyes, so that kind of gives you like a little quick touch in, and the same can be true for a journey. Maybe you had a journey and it had, like you said, these themes to it. Name those themes almost like subcategories, or chapters in a book or scenes in a movie, and what were those scenes? What would you call those scenes, or what would you label, or what title would you give those? And it's a creative way to tap into some of the energy that is available to us through our dreams and through the journeys, and to savor it and to hold on to it.
mm. 100%. I love that. I'm actually going to start using that. Thank you.
Hmm.
The thing that I've been doing lately has been taking little keywords and then, but I feel like a title and the keywords would go a really long way. Especially if as I ran into this problem with dream journaling, if you have an early shift at work, let's say, and you're just really groggy, it's sometimes a little challenging to,
Hmm.
especially if you have a really long in-depth dream, you're not always able to write 2 pages of detail. But a title, like you said, is fantastic. Like just a little summary there, and then some keywords if you can manage, and usually I found that's enough for me that even if I've done a whole day of work, I can come back, look at keywords or say look at a title and then remember. So that's perfect.
And I think you tapped into something that's really important for us to remember as we're doing our healing work, that sometimes we can be leaking energy. All
Mm,
right. And leaking energy shows up in a variety of different ways. Maybe you're going into and this comes up more in dreams than it does perhaps in the medicine journey, but it can show up in both places. Maybe you are going into a room and the room's really messy, or you're trying to find the bathroom and you can't find it, but then once you find the bathroom's like all messed up and kind of yucky, and you're like, oh no, so these dreams may be showing us that there's some yucky stuff that we're still dealing with. It might even be kind of smelly, poopy stuff that we don't really want to have to deal with, but it's coming up in the dreams, sometimes in the journey. And it can show us where perhaps we need to clean up and be careful that we're not leaking our energy. When I say our energy, I mean like our vital life force. For example, great example that you gave. If I'm people pleasing, that could lead to me leaking some of my vital energy. And if I'm always attuned to how do I make everybody else happy, but I'm not making myself happy, I'll get into a deficit energy situation where I'm focused more externally giving to everyone else, but not replenishing myself. And that's a leak.
And the scary, well, not necessarily scary, but one of the aspects of energy leaks is that it doesn't a true energy leak I found doesn't really tend to benefit anyone, least of all ourselves. But a great example is if you have a stressful situation happens and you tense up and you get really, really frustrated and your system's flooded with cortisol now. Everyone I'm sure has had this experience, which is why I'm using it. It's kind of a universal part of being human. Whenever you have that, you get really, really tired afterwards. And like oftentimes your head gets fuzzy. Maybe you got a headache now. And all of that nonsense did nothing to resolve the issue. So it's that's an energy leak. You just kind of feel bad or tired
Yep.
and nothing has actually changed in any kind of positive way.
Yes, and an energy leak, the way we can identify an energy leak or a way where perhaps we're getting triggered is we feel the adrenaline hit our system. And
Mm.
it's just like that slight little bit of adrenaline, and all of a sudden our heart rate starts to go up a little bit, and our respiration starts to change just a little bit. And all of a sudden, like you said, your adrenaline starts to rush, and the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, and the kidneys are the major filtration system for the body. So the adrenal glands are stretched out or stressed out, and they sit on top of the kidneys, which is the filtration system for the body. And then that actually begins to shut down very temporarily, but still shut down your immune system. And so then you find yourself more susceptible to colds and flus and viruses and things like that, because you're having these trigger points where you're leaking energy, and then your body is responding by the cortisol and the adrenaline and overtaxing your kidneys and not functioning at optimal levels. So, and so many people, Daniel, that I've worked with function on that way every day. It's,
24/7.
I know, it's not
Yep.
like occasionally. It's the place they function from, and they don't even know how maybe that's, kind of, you can do that for a while where you're young, right? You can do it in your 20s, you can maybe get away with it, but it starts to accumulate and have a negative impact, and just on your own health and wellness, on your vitality and strength. And we really want to focus on regenerating ourselves, right? So we have to be aware of what regenerates us and what degenerates us.
That's actually something that you pointed out about your work with ketamine before, is because ketamine is a dissociative, and you can really separate yourself from your physical aches and pains. It's super helpful to see what a baseline is supposed to look like. So you go into this out of body experience and suddenly you realize, wait a minute, I'm not. I'm really, really tired, or I'm really, really so you're not I'm not supposed to feel that way. Now you have at least a baseline. I found that other medicines, even if they're not dissociative, give you something very similar, like an emotional baseline. That's something that I've experienced a lot, where I experienced when I first started medicine work, I was extremely depressed, and most of my journeys were very positive, uplifting, high energy. And I didn't understand it very well then, but what I see so clearly now is that it was showing me this is a, like this is what you should be feeling. You're not, you know, with this is a healthy space to be in. This is what that looks like. Because I was so far removed that I'd forgotten, you know, at that point.
It's an amazing aspect, and understanding that is very vital because we're shifting away from a trauma industrial culture. And the trauma industrial culture says you always have to be productive, you always have to be producing. And there's always this kind of push underneath, consciously or unconsciously, because that's been the culture norm, right? And so what we're seeing now and evolving to hopefully now in a much greater way, and definitely generationally we're moving into a healing culture. And a healing culture is one that values rest, and a healing culture values relationship, and the healing culture, you know, values ritual as much as productivity, right? There's a balance. It's not like you're not going to be productive at all, but there's a balance in that. And then from that, we move from a consciousness of not consumption, but rather consciousness. So, consciousness, not consumption, is the new frontier.
Mhm.
Consciousness, not consumption, is the new frontier.
Oh, 100%. Well, consciousness is also accessible to anyone, whereas things like space, a little less so. But consciousness is something we can all explore. It's our birthright. And this also delves into something that is really near and dear to me because you brought up culture and social systems. Now, I will say two truths that exist, right? One of them is that the only thing that we can really affect is ourselves and our own decisions at the end of the day. We cannot control other people. Now, the other truth that I will bring up is that systems do affect us in a very real way, and that's just the honest to God truth. Even though we have a limited ability to influence other people, like, the systems do affect us. So let's say the best example I can give is Korea. If you look at North and South Korea, the people there are they are genetically, you know, basically the same genetically. Like they come from a very similar cultural background that split at some point. But when you look at Korea in space at nighttime, you can see that one country has almost no lights and the other is filled with lights. Um, so that is an effect from the culture. Now, where this becomes challenging, and I'm really excited about a little back and forth on this, is that I believe in working towards systemic shifts and cultural shifts because it does affect people. Now, at the same time, I recognize that the only people we can truly influence is ourselves. So the phrase that comes to mind for me with that is, you know, what is yours to carry? What is mine to carry? And I feel that the answer, having people answer that question will get us closer towards a cultural shift. But what do you think about all of that? There's a lot there.
Yes, I think it really comes back to what we started talking about, and that is the Eleusinian mysteries. So part of the reason they did that, these rituals went on for hundreds of years. Some even say maybe 1,000 years they did this ritual. So what it was is a community coming together, initiating one another into a consciousness of healing on this journey. It's the shift that I was just talking about. It's away from consumerism into consciousness. And so I think as we create these smaller, um, morphic resonance communities, And so I think in small ways, in the microcosm, in communities where we create this, and then perhaps in bigger ways, that we can create this consciousness of healing. In order to do that, though, there's going to have to be some shifts in the current rituals that we're doing. And one of the biggest shifts, and this is a big one, and I hold the vision that we can figure this one out. We have to move away from global war as a ritual.
Mm,
And global war is a kind of dysfunctional ritual, that leads to death and destruction. So, what we need to do is move toward a much more life affirming global ritual that has a shared consciousness of wanting to evolve and
mm,
wanting to grow in an awareness that this little tiny planet that we all inhabit is the only planet we have. And we have to figure out how to live in collaboration, in cooperation, in community together on this planet. And of all the things that they did in ancient Greece and in these rituals, they found a way to make that happen. And they found a way to exist. And perhaps psychedelic medicines is a component to this, that we find a way to coexist, that we find a way to unify consciousness through the psychedelic medicine experiences, through community ritual, through a dream of oneness and away from this, war is the only means um, to figure things out.
mm. 100%. This delves into some pretty momentous work I've been doing in the background, so I'm really, really glad that you brought up this creating new rituals because that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that many, many, many people want change, but they have no idea what they would do. So let's say like they want to change something about how decisions are made or change something about politics, and it's just like they come up against this wall, which is it's just a wall of ignorance. It's the desire is there, but the knowledge of what alternatives exists is not. So I have utilized the magic of chunking that I mentioned before. I've really tried to look at foundational systems that lead us to the outcomes that we have today. So like, what are some of the core things that we do that lead to war, that lead to autocracy, political instability, this sort of stuff. And one of the big foundations is education. So that there's five major foundations. Education's one of the big ones. Education is where people learn about the society that they're going to be entering and their role in that society, besides from their parents. But a lot of kids spend as much time or more time in school than they will with their own families. So they're getting a huge piece of that. And the school system, the initial foundation of the school system, and I'm going to be really careful about how I say this, the foundation of it came from the Prussian military school system designed to train soldiers for obedience. So certain mechanisms down to literally the bell that sounds every hour, it comes from, and also this emphasis on obedience and often blind obedience, it comes from that. So the where I'm gonna be careful is I know that that system was built upon and things were shifted, etc., over the years, but that's the core. So no matter how much it's shifted, it's built on that foundation. So this is, you could tweak it and put stuff on top of it, but this is where the structure comes from. So that's the first thing that can shift. And there's a lot of hope in that too. So like charter schools exist that use public school funding but teach in alternative methods. Like there's charter Waldorf schools, charter Montessori schools, charter and other systems. So the money is not the issue of changing that. I just want to make that abundantly clear. There that you can you can build charter schools. I've seen it before. Famously, the Hare Krishna community in Gainesville built a charter Montessori school, and they did that so that people could have accessible education, but not in that that public system. So that's the first thing. And the vision there is if instead of being taught blind obedience and just regurgitation, you're taught to actually investigate the world and come to conclusions. You learn about, they in Waldorf they call it head, heart, hands. So not just the intellectual, but you're learning to really engage with those around you and work with your hands and make things. Um, that immediately changes so much. Just that. It's so impactful. If you teach people in school to have an actual stake in their classrooms, then suddenly they'll be more likely to have an act feel like they have an actual stake in their society, for instance. And you feel free to pause me because this is something I've been working on for years. So like
I think it's
I'm ready to put
brilliant.
this out. Yeah. So
I think it's
hmm,
brilliant, Daniel, and I think you're spot on. And there has to be a revisioning of how we educate. And
hmm.
obviously, so many parents are already attuned to this, and they're in small communities doing homeschooling and creating curriculums for themselves that do engage the head, the heart, and the hands in a much more experiential learning. And so I think our society is reflecting your vision in the current moment, which is encouraging. It's hopeful.
Oh yeah. And that brings me to number two. Is I mentioned kids having an actual stake in their environment. So this is something that has to be age appropriate, obviously. Like a kindergartner is not going to be deciding administrative things. But somebody in like say senior high school or the equivalent, maybe they can start to make some bigger decisions. So within an age appropriate scope, kids should be involved. Now, this also extends to adults too. Like how can adults make as many decisions in their environment as possible? And with that, I discovered something called dynamic governance, which it's a method of making decisions by consent. And in when you're making decisions by consent in a community setting, the goal is to have as many decisions as possible made in the local level. And it goes up to the next level whenever a decision is going to affect more than that local area. So this is revealed, I think, in the most beautiful way by the Indian Children's Parliament. So I'll just give that example for people to look at. This dynamic governance is also something that I've taught. So to really oversimplify it, there's four core concepts. One of them is small groups, because you can't have 100 people agreeing on almost anything. So you need a small enough group that you can actually move forward with decisions. The next one is the principle of rounds. So within that small group, everyone gets a chance to speak and deliberately so. So you're not saying, does anyone have any questions and hoping that you are saying, hey, you know, really giving every single person that uninterrupted window to speak. The principle of consent is another one, which I love the principle of consent. And just to delve into that one a little more deeply, it is not consent doesn't mean that a decision is exactly what you want. It also doesn't mean that a decision won by a vote. So it's not a majority rules thing. Consent just means that there's no objection. Objection being this decision is going to interfere with whatever it is we're trying to do. And the shorthand phrase for that is good enough for now, safe enough to try. It means that you can actually move forward with decisions, but that the decisions aren't going to be intolerable or actually counterproductive to whatever the goals of the group are. So that's number three. Number four is linking. Because when you have small groups and you want to have consent across a broader organization, then there needs to be some kind of connection there. So people from each of the small groups are interconnected. Now, the Indian Children's Parliament that uses this system, they were a group, they were groups of kids based on neighborhoods in India that would meet with each other and they would make little decisions about their community. So they'd make decisions about like one person would be in charge of making sure that trash was picked up, and another person would try to make sure that kids could get to school on time. So they'd make little decisions, and over time they would have they would pick representatives who would get together to form like broader communities. And what's really cool is these kids, right? As this structure grew and there were more and more interconnected groups of these kids, they started to actually have really major impacts. And my favorite one to share is where there was a place in India, it was a province, I believe, where child marriages were a thing. And these kids, after meeting in their groups and connecting with people outside of that province, they started to say, "Hey, we're not sure if we're not sure if we like this." So the kids got together and started to meet with, with the local representatives and governments of the region, and they actually got child marriages banned. Kids. These
Wow.
were children that did this.
Wonderful.
So the potential is enormous, and there's other stories too, but I really encourage people to just start down the rabbit hole by looking at the Indian Children's Parliament to see what I mean. And just consider if you raise kids in an education system that honors the whole of the individual and you give them that decision-making toolkit,
Mhm.
and this is what they go through for 12 years, as opposed to do what I say, sit in your chair, shut up, regurgitate information. Like when you have what I've described versus that, just imagine where that will go. And I think that most people who hear that would prefer, what I've just said. So that's number two. Number three, well, there's a couple of things. Entheogens is one of the things that I bring into this, and it's frustrating because I know that it's still controversial in so much of the world, but I'm hoping that that changes with the types of conversations we're having now, showing why it's so important to include this, in a framework of shifting. Like I think we've made that abundantly clear. So entheogens, which the whole podcast is about, so I don't need to go in depth on that. Number four is something. Number four is something that I put in just because of. So it's low-hanging fruit, but it is very impactful, and that's voting systems. Voting systems right now are using, at least in the US and most of Europe, it's usually ranked choice, but here it's something called first past the post. That means that you pick one person and then nobody else. And what this does, the best way for me to explain why this causes issues is because of something called the spoiler effect. So the spoiler effect is where, let's say that you have purple and orange candidates, right? And but there's a significant number of people that blue is what they want. Blue is everything that they want, but purple is the most popular, so they have to vote, so they have to vote purple. Now, if they decide to go with what they actually want and vote blue, they're actually pulling votes away from purple and potentially causing orange to win. So it's a counterintuitive thing that happens with first past the post, where picking the person that you actually feel good about oftentimes causes the opposite of what you want to happen. So famously, like in the United States, so Al Gore versus George Bush, Al Gore lost because of the spoiler effect, because of people that were probably much closer aligned to him. And this isn't me saying anyone's better or worse. It's just giving an example. This is, a real thing that's affected us even recently. So with multiple choice voting, like a ranked choice voting or approval voting, like usually you'll pick the person that you feel is safe, but you'll also be able to put on your ranked list or on your multiple choice selection the person that you actually want. And this paints a significantly more accurate picture of what the actual landscape is. Like people will probably notice that, and of course this is true with ranked choice voting places as well, but people will notice that oftentimes the options available to them are very different from what they actually want. That's a big part of why. It's not the only thing, but it's a huge, like I said, low-hanging fruit that makes a massive difference. Now, number five, which is the very last one, that is something called geoism, which is basically it is taking the value of land as a form of social funding. So Alaska Permanent Fund is like geoism on a small scale. That's where the people that come into Alaska to take natural resources, they have to pay Alaska for that, and that money goes straight back to the people. And this is huge. Like it's actually illustrated in the Bible. So if and it's especially for the United States, a lot of people purport to follow the Bible. So I really want, especially those people, to go into the verses that talk about the initial Christian church. And what they would do was whenever they sold land or houses, they would give the excess proceeds of that to the community. And it was said that they lacked nothing. That's straight out of the Bible. Just I really want to emphasize again, I have my own beliefs, people have their own beliefs. If you believe strongly in the Bible, look that up. It's there, I promise. It says exactly that. The proceeds of the land and housing went back to the community. Very different from how we do things today. And so those are five broad categories. And I know that was a very long spiel, and I gotta stop apologizing for it. I'm just gonna, it's important. It's important,
It's
especially,
very
yeah.
important. I'm really glad you shared that.
Mm,
And really, what it points to is how we learn to um, own our own power and
mm,
use our own power effectively. And it really is something that people struggle with, both in personal empowerment as well as a shared empowerment. And how do we navigate that? So, those are incredibly good examples of how do we own our power? How do we teach our children to own their power, use it wisely, use it in a group, small group situation? How can you? Um, Create a collaborative kind of effort and then manifest that into actual action or plans that may influence or impact a whole community. And so those are seeds that we have to plant very early on. And for those parents, perhaps who don't have the luxury of sending their kids to a Waldorf or Montessori or something like that, I do encourage them to create these kind of um, uh, conversations about power and about empowering oneself. How do we empower one another in their homes and speaking from the heart? Because a lot of our conversations tend to come from here, and I use a little heart to heart. And one of the key things with the heart to heart is only the person with the heart gets to talk. Because we've come to this place in our culture today where people aren't listening at all. They're just talking over one another. They're just waiting to reply. They're not really hearing what the other person is saying. And so we need to slow down that communication to the point where, okay, you're speaking, I'm listening, I'm going to listen intently, and then I'm going to choose how I want to respond rather than react. And we have to teach this to our children when they're very, very young, because it doesn't just come naturally. There's a natural competitiveness that children have. And so we have to, which is fine. It can be very helpful for them, but we have to kind of temper the competitiveness with compassion, compassion for the self, compassion for the other, and from there springs this kind of connectedness of, how do we become the parliament that governs ourselves with love, with compassion, with integrity, with respect, and thrive in that environment. And hopefully, incrementally, we're moving toward that a little bit more, through our educational process, through our governance, but it starts when children are very, very young. And we have to be the ones to plant the seeds in their minds, in their hearts, in their souls, in their spirits for this.
mm. I have a follow-up to that, which is it's actually something from my most recent journey. This was made abundantly clear to me. So you mentioned speaking from the heart, right? And sometimes you can say the exact same thing, but the place where it's coming from, maybe even your tone, etc., can change the meaning or the way that it is received. So what was shown to me is that one of the reasons that I struggle to convey certain things, even though they're important, is because I have this very aggressive mentality around certain things. Like I I have experienced things in my life due to systemic issues that have been very difficult, and because of that, sometimes when I speak on something, even though the vision is beautiful, my mindset is aggressive, if that makes sense. And so, I really want this to hit home, especially because I believe that, I want there to be more people that are affecting positive social change. And I know that a lot of people that are doing so have that same issue that I've run into, where there's oftentimes people that are affecting change are doing so because of something traumatic that happened, which can, like in my case, lead to anger being a big driving force. So for somebody like that, what would you say would be a way for them to affect the positive social change and to um, channel the anger in a positive way rather than have it poison what they're trying to do?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And part of what's innate in that question is that early on, there was something that happened systemically that created that need for that young one, perhaps like the inner child that's inside of us or the younger version of ourselves, to feel as though it needed to be defended. Right. And so instead of coming across in a way where and maybe we felt overwhelmed by the people around us and their voices became so dominant and we had to defend ourselves in order to have our own agency, in order to, try to push back some, to have our own voice, to have our own thoughts. And so, but that pattern, taken any pattern taken to an extreme like that becomes a deficit, right? If I might have pushed some as a young person, but now as an adult, it just sounds defensive and aggressive.
Mm.
And so, one of the things I have to realize is that this is a learned behavior. I can address the part of me that has felt this kind of, need to be defended. And I can see, and I can kind of reparent myself, go back to that younger version of myself and say, you know what, I've got your back and you're safe. And I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you. And I want to respond differently because sometimes it's the younger version of ourselves that's saying, they can't say that to me that way. They can't do that to me. I have, I have to defend myself. But in an adult body, it comes out like, ah, you know.
Yeah.
And it's so true. It's you just explained it so beautifully. So what we need to do then is just take a breath. The breath resets everything. Breathing puts the brain in neutral. Like, okay, I need to take a breath, reset the brain, and just say, drop the energy from here where it might be coming from much more intellectual sparring and drop the energy down into your heart and take a breath and then speak from your heart. Speak from that place where the heart energy softens the message some. And you can even say in that moment, I said that in such a way I really want to redo on that because I didn't say it in the way that I really wanted to. Can just give me another chance to rephrase that. Drop the energy down into your heart, then speak whatever it was from there, and you'll see the energetic field around it changes. Your voice lowers, your that kind of tight anxiousness fades away. And it's a real good reminder to us all, to me too. Sometimes we're trying to just speed through things instead of really being mindful, slowing things down and speaking from a different place inside of us that can connect and make what our message is land even better.
100%. And there's another aspect to this as well. And it goes back to a phrase I was saying about what is our Sakari. So I've this is something that has actually been quite challenging for me, even with all the integration I've been and the work I've been doing. So, for instance, I was part of a group that was trying to build a community center at one point, and we were struggling. It didn't end up happening. And I remember I put a lot of energy into that, and I leaked a lot of energy when it didn't pan out because of the frustration. So just a few weeks ago, I was with a group that I work for, Seraphia. It's a church, and they held ceremony at, get this, a community center
Mm,
that holds ceremony for medicine work. It's like it's everything. Literally, I look around and it's everything that the group I was in was trying to build that was happening in the background without any of our knowledge. And it made me pause and think, well, clearly this particular thing wasn't mine to carry, but can that be discerned beforehand? And what does that even look like? Like, can you really know, or at least have a good intuition that something is or isn't yours to carry before it gets to the point that you're investing so much energy, into something, especially for people doing social change type of work?
In my opinion, there are times when we're going to be called or we'll feel drawn to being of service in a particular way. And in the way that I view this, no effort that we put into being of service is ever wasted, ever. It may not be completed by us, all right, but our carrying that energy or carrying that vision, or helping to manifest it in any way, shape, or form can add to incrementally the success of that vision manifesting. And that's a part of this morphic resonance that we're talking about as well. If even if it was just you carrying the vision of that center being a reality, you literally walked into your vision. And so,
Yeah.
you know, it was what did it need? It needed others to believe that it was possible, and it needed others to carry the vision and the hope for this. And then maybe you were the one to, be a part of the vision holder. Some of us are just doing that. We hold the vision that, we can have access to psychedelic medicines that we know can help in our society today. We know can help heal anxiety, depression. We know can stem the tide on suicide rates. We know this. We have research. We have data. We have, life stories. I see it in my practice every week. I'm filled with hope because I see how this is manifesting. And honestly, I didn't think this would manifest in my lifetime again, Daniel. I'm almost 71 years old. Did I think that I was going to be a psychedelic therapist in my lifetime? Not a chance. It was a thing of my youth, and I had to go other directions, but a little part of me held the vision. Maybe this could happen. Maybe this could be a reality. And now I'm in it. Just like you walked into that center, and that community center was your vision, and you walked into it. So we're walking into it, we're carrying the vision, and we're doing whatever we're called to do. No matter if it's a complete success or not, who's to judge that?
I really appreciate that. That's a perspective that I think I needed to hear. Thank you. Thank
Hmm.
you. And this hour has actually flown by. Can you believe that? It's been an hour.
Oh my gosh,
This
this
is
was amazing.
fantastic. Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to call it, unless you have anything to add.
I'm so glad we're doing the Descent and Return retreat together, and invite people to connect with you or connect with me. This won't be the only one we're having, but this one is on May 1st, and it's a full moon ceremony, which will be lovely as well because Friday, May 1st is a full moon. So it's going to be a great experience, and I'm looking forward to participating in that with you, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you have a link for our listeners?
Yes, they can go to gaylyn.net. They can call me directly, and I could give a phone number, or we could put that in at the end of the podcast. And then if they want to call me at 352-322-2134, they can call me at that number, and we'll give them all the details and get them all signed up. And it's going to be 3 days. And it's going to be a very healing and wonderful experience.
Wonderful. And if anyone's interested in the stuff I was talking about, I will leave a link there. I have articles, I have stories. I like to write a lot of things that are like parable style, so those are pretty fun. So yeah, that'll be in the description. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I will join you all in the next one.